Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Property XPerts Podcast with me, Ben Richards, and Jack Jiggins. Thanks for tuning in. As always, we've got a jam-packed episode today, and I will start off with the agenda. It's the 2nd of August 2024 for those listening on the podcast. We're going to be talking about interns. We spoke briefly about it last week. They've started the mass influx of interns has been this week, so we're going to be talking a little bit about that process. We've been doing some old school marketing. Our BDM's been stomping the pavement, stomping the grounds, speaking to people. We're going to be going into a little bit of detail around that. This week was a really big meeting for our social housing portfolio. So yeah, very interesting. Do stick around to understand a little bit more about that industry and why we've had a few growing pains. We're going to be talking through how we've been trying to overcome some of those. This is something I didn't know existed until a couple of years ago. It's the property guardian and sort of site security process. So if you've got a vacant property and you need to securitize it or keep it secure, should I say, we're going to be discussing a company that can do that for you. Jack is going to be giving some insight into holistic learning. I'm intrigued to understand what that's about. So stick around to point number 5. And then when is enough enough? I often ask myself that, and we'll be discussing that in greater depth later. Ironing out the underwriter early on from a financial perspective. We've got a busy day, busy couple of days next week on the property entrepreneur. And finally, we're going to be talking about worrying about only things that you can control. I'm sure you've all come across this and got very frustrated around things, and we're going to be discussing I guess why you shouldn't get that frustrated by things. And as always, we will answer any question. And absolutely massive shout out to Jordan Abdi today, who's already at 4:40 asked us 3 big questions in YouTube. So yeah, we'll be getting onto those, Jordan, at the end. And we've got 2 other questions that have come in through Instagram this week as well, which we'll be getting onto. Before we get into the interns piece, actually, we can't brush past the announcement yesterday that interest rates have been cut by 0.25%, or is it 25 bips? Is that what finance people say?
Bits and kit. That's the city
language. I've never really fully understood that, but I guess I'm starting to, given we're much more in the space nowadays. But
it's bips is basis points.
Points. Yeah.
25 basis points, 100 basis points in a percent. Yeah. So it's basically a decimal. So it's 1.25 is 1%, 0.25 decimal points.
Bips. So yeah, interesting news, good news for all. I mean, I'm assuming that's good news. I mean, it is. I can't see anyone that's going to think it's any different. I contrarily kind of didn't want much change because it meant that people were accepting the norm and willing to take action. But I think people are still doing that anyway. They have been for a while, knowing that things have stabilized a bit. And this is just hopefully going to incentivize a few more lenders to drop their rates and give people a bit more comfort around taking action and moving forward. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, just to touch on that, there's kind of always the movers in the market. You've always got death, marriage, divorce, but families growing. So they're always going to be moving in the market, no matter what the market's doing. If the market dictates a good time to be buying or a bad time to be buying or moving, they're going to be moving regardless. So it pushes the segment in the middle, which is the people that don't necessarily need to, but it's a good time so that they push and get a move on. One thing I think is the most important thing about the rate cut is not actually how much are we saving now because it's gone down 25 basis points. It's more a turn of the mood. That was the first cut that we've seen since 2020. And for you folk out there that don't know your calendar months, that's 4.5 years ago. That we've only been seeing steady or upwards trajectory. So I think it's more a statement on hopefully confidence on bringing back some economy and activity and to warrant. I'm a big believer that a busy economy is when everyone's confident to spend, whether that's consumer or businesses, because it then has a an effect on all other, it pollinates across the whole industry. So all for it. Good news. Let's hope we get another one, but it's good news, full stop, regardless.
Question from me. December 31st this year, where are we going to be at with interest rates? What percentage?
So when I presented at Brendan's event, I got everyone in the audience to shut their eyes and pick what rate we'd be at this time in September, because that was when his next event was.
Yeah.
So I did this with people like Richard Bowser in the room and had a little bit of an eyesore. But I think we're going to be at either 4.5 or 4.75 by the end of the year.
Mm-hmm. Very good.
A lot of people, quickly on that, a lot of people in January said 4 or below, which I couldn't see personally.
Yeah, I'm a little bit more hopeful that we're going to be down at like 4.25 to 4.5. Comments below, let us know. What do you think? How far is it going to go? Or is it going to go up? Or is it going to stay the same? Drop your comments down below and let us know. Cool. So on to this week's agenda. Interns. There's 1, 2, 3, 4 on the screen. And I think, are there more actually
That's total 4, yeah.
Is that total? So the 4 interns. So we've took on board a quantity surveyor as an intern for a project manager role. We've got a building surveyor who is helping out from a CAD technician and a surveys perspective. And then you've got 2 people in central suites from a real estate background.
Yeah, both real estate degrees, one helping in basically one in projects and one in management and lettings.
Yeah, nice. And we've had various interactions this week with these guys. Typically, guys and girls, they're typically sort of year 2/3 into their uni course. Very bright cookies, really super keen to learn, which is all you can ask when you take on sort of interns at this level. They're obviously inexperienced for the most part. That's the whole reason they're doing this type of thing. But all you can ask is that they are actively wanting to learn. They're asking the right questions. They're showing initiative and getting stuck in. So it's been a good start this week, I think, for what I've seen. Yeah,
I'll just add to that is, so the incentive behind the internships is Reading University contribute to about 2 weeks worth of their pay. So our view is if we can get them pulling their own weight within 2 weeks, and that's there's a lot of time that is given to bring them up to speed and help them learn. But then hopefully, they start pulling their weight and doing some intuitive, tasks that are more, admin focused. They can get an understanding of it. You might be asking why we would do it for an intern, which is obviously in a placement is a year, an intern is normally a summer, and work experience is normally an unpaid week. The reason that we're doing these interns is they are looking for graduate roles locally, and we are close to Reading University. So, maybe one day we might be hiring some or all, or maybe none, but hopefully we have the opportunity to keep working with these, these students, and they're all a breath of fresh air. And I was actually really impressed with the interview process. They're all had done their own homework, and actually I'd argue that I've had a lot more less professional interviews with fully qualified adults that have been in the industry for 15 years over the last few years, and it's good to see people that are hungry, which you don't tend to see, and it's kind of very laissez-faire. So enjoyed it so far. It's been very difficult to get devote the time. Like I feel like my days are just getting swallowed, and it doesn't feel like I've done anything, but you have, because you forget that these students haven't got any practical experience. All they're doing is theoretical. And I think out of all 4 interns, not one of them are from a family of property people. So, they haven't had the exposure that we're used to. So it's starting from ground up, pun intended. But that's good.
I find that when you take on interns like this that are quite green, some of the questions they ask challenge you, because you kind of crack on with your day to day and you don't think twice about certain things. And when people are seeing things with fresh eyes from, a different point of view, and they ask certain questions, you're like, yeah, not really sure why we do it that way. And then you start thinking about it, maybe think about ways in improving it and being better. So, it's good to have those sorts of differing opinions and questions coming at you as well. So hopefully over the next 8 weeks, we'll get a lot of value from them, and they will get a lot of value from us. So yeah, super excited about that. Number 2, Eagle, helicopter view, holistic learning. I'm not really sure where you wanted to go with this, so I'm intrigued.
It's actually to do with the interns. And And I suppose I was actually talking to Ben. I met with that potential investor today who actually has a training business in actually sport and education, and we were talking about how a good person that's good at doing something is not necessarily a good person at teaching something. So we can all probably relate back to school when we had, those types of teachers that knew their subjects, their modules, the textbook inside out. If they weren't good at teaching you, it kind of defeats the object of them being a teacher and transferring that information to you as a person. So, I mean, I've been thinking a lot because we've brought these 4 interns in. We've given them 4 line managers. There's four separate line managers managing 4 separate people, and we all have different ways of teaching, and thinking about things. And it's quite interesting to think to yourself also how you teach and communicate things, because like Ben said, we're moving at a million miles an hour. We haven't really had a sit down and thought about things. But what I think is always really useful, and the reason that I'm putting this in here, is because we talked about our quarterly review in our businesses. If you're not prepared to give a holistic view of everything first, the segment that you're teaching in is really, really difficult to understand. So for an example, I actually ChatGPT'd a analogy for holistic learning, and the analogy it came up with is actually like the aspects of a garden. So you wouldn't consider just the plant itself or what type of plant you want to go. You would go with soil quality, water distribution, sunlight, companion plants, beneficial insects, and all of these things. But the principle is what we're trying to osmosis and share with others. And I think that this channel and what we share on this is quite granular, and we do go into individual topics. And if you don't have the full understanding, or you haven't followed us in a while, head over to our YouTube channel, because we've actually got a video on there that we pulled together for the Business Insider reporter for the Independent, and that gives a really holistic view over our business. And that was like the first thing that I tasked all the team with. And I think that if your team members don't have a holistic view, they can't really understand what they're doing in the business, their day-to-day part. And it's that vision, it's the core values, it's the goals, it's the metrics in terms of monetary metrics, profitability, efficiency. It's the team, the goal, like the 5-year plan, and understanding all of those elements. Let them in, because they will help you get to those, more important things. They say you sharpen, your axe, you'll chop 10 trees down quicker than if you started earlier and didn't sharpen your axe. So, big believer in it, and it comes true that all the people that we've had start this week have all took like duck to water and really understood it. And I think that's because we started with a holistic view.
Nice. I like it. I mean, that goes hand in hand with the stuff that we teach in our sort of one-to-one consultancy and boardroom stuff about the strategy on a page stuff, where the left-hand side of the whole thing, before you even start getting into the nitty-gritty, is really about that blue sky vision. What are you doing this for? What is the vision of the company? What do you want out of it? Because if you can't answer those questions, then you're not going to be able to chomp it down into bite-sized pieces to tackle and kind of give you something to aim toward. So yeah, I think that's great. I actually had a chat with Heather. So Heather joined us again this week, who used to be working in XP Surveys as a business manager. She's now moving across to work with Jack and I as an executive assistant. And the conversation I had with her is I not struggle, but this week I've been thinking I need to get out of my headspace of thinking as XP Surveys, and that's your pigeonhole. And she said it was great because of all of the group strategy days that we did during her time in XP Surveys, where she was understanding and learning more about the wider businesses and how each one impacts each other. And that's given her a great test bed, really, or understanding coming into this new role, where she understands fully kind of the bigger picture about what we're trying to do, not just being pigeonholed into XP Surveys. And before we move on, I've got a bone to pick with ChatGPT. I cannot I cannot accept that every single answer that it gives me is correct. And I'll tell you why. We have a syndicate. I think I've told you about this, like a betting syndicate with my mates since like college. And it was my month to bet this month. And I bet on Heather Watson and her partner in the doubles tennis for for the Olympics this week, and I didn't have time to like go to BBC and like find out the article or so I asked ChatGPT, did Heather Watson get through their round of tennis, and it told me that they didn't, and I'd bet on it. I was like, I messaged the lads and like, oh, you know, this bet's gone down, and you know, that's my money spent, all this sort of stuff. And then like 3 hours later, one of my mates said, what are you talking about? Screenshotted me this BBC of like Heather Watson getting through to the next round. I'm like, oh, for God's sake, like ChatGPT cannot be trusted. This is not good.
The way I see ChatGPT, and I think I summarized this really well the other day, is like having a really smart close friend sat next to you every minute of the day, and you don't feel bad that you ask so many questions. Sometimes the friend might be wrong, but what you've got to remember is they're probably smarter than you, so it's your own fault for asking the question in the first place.
But I mean, it's got so many good, you know, positive things, and it's incredible. I was just let down by its tennis knowledge.
I used it again yesterday for a really good one.
Yeah.
So Rob and I went and played golf yesterday evening, really late. And just as we were getting into the car, I took a photo of the golf scorecard, which had my pencil scribbles all the way along it.
Yeah.
And I just said, top line is Jack, bottom line is Rob, count up who won. And it gave me a breakdown of the scores where Rob like really had the hand.
It was right.
Oh yeah, completely right.
Yeah.
And
your writing's terrible.
Thank you very much.
No, I'm joking.
Great. Any golfers out there, you don't need to count up anymore.
Yeah. Well, that's it. I've seen the iPad, the latest iPad has like if you write 7 + 7 equals, it will finish it for you and write 14, which is pretty cool. I also had Graham had another AI boo-boo with LinkedIn. LinkedIn's AI said something like, Aura Architecture's managing director, Mark Donnelly, studied architecture at Belfast University and did all this sort of stuff. And I was like, that's not accurate at all. So yeah, just use AI sensibly. Don't trust everything it says, but most of the time it gives you an amazing sidekick, basically. Cool. Point number 3, BDM. We brought Trevor on a couple of months ago as the business development manager in XP Surveys. Over that time, we've been figuring out how we can reach new architects, new clients, and we've been approaching a long list of architectural practices. So finding areas that we can visit, creating lists, reaching out to them, trying to set up meetings. He's already done a full day with Jack around Henley-on-Thames, visiting a couple of architects. And this week it was his time to come to Clapham to visit a couple of architects around me. And it was actually really good. You know, we met a couple of architects, had a really good conversation, sort of built our sales pitch a lot more. I think having seen how Jack approaches it and then having seen how I approach it more from like the technical side of stuff, I think Trevor's got a really good understanding now of how to sell our services to architects and what the key benefits are for those people. But what was actually great and something that we got out of the day is other ways in which we can reach out to architects or meet new people. And it was going to big WeWork and big co-working spaces. So 2 of the architects that we met happened to be in the same co-working area. So actually all we did was say, do you know of any more? And they could say, yes, there's a 100-person strong architecture practice down that road. There's like a team of 6 over here. It gave us greater opportunity to think about, other ways we can reach out to people, other methods that we can use to kind of get the message out there and do more business development. And going forward, Trevor's going to be looking at like hotspot co-working spaces that we can attack and set up some meetings to meet architects there. So we spoke a couple of weeks ago about how to use like old school marketing like this, where it's like literally knocking on doors, speaking to people, versus the more kind of pull type marketing where you're doing pay-per-click advertising or you're doing social media and you're trying to attract the right people, whereas this is physically going out, knocking on doors and getting in people's faces. So if you've got a service-based business, you need to be thinking about how you can get in front of your avatar client and planning to get out there and get in people's faces. Cool. Jack, ironing out the underwriter early on from a finance perspective.
this is kind of the bugbear of our recent application with UTB and our social housing provider. So I mean, it's when, so the way I see your if you're working with lenders and you're refinancing something, or even if you're buying something, it's always good to iron out all of the potential problems that may hinder them on lending on that particular asset at the very outset, or as soon as you can, because what will end up happening is you'll fork out a load of legal costs, a load of valuation costs, and get to the point where it's an iceberg is a really big underneath it. You'll ruin the whole situation and cost you time and money. And we had a first experience of that. We said since day one, we outlined the problems or the potential hurdles with our social portfolio. That tends to be around the size of the units, the location of the units, the investment base valuation, and also the housing association themselves, because they are the covenant. So obviously there's a lot of work that a bank would need to get comfortable with for that particular covenant. But anyway, so we've gone through all of this process driven stuff, and they've actually gone back on something they've said. Now, we talked a few months ago about an application that we had through with Yorkshire Building Society, and we actually managed to argue some funds back as almost like compensation, because they had gone back on something that we had so obviously had transparently shared at the beginning of the process. So don't feel like you've got to hide your cards and what you're doing. Obviously, if there's a big stopper and you're chancing it, that's a very, very different story. But I'm talking about small potential problems that most banks should take a pragmatic view, because you'll save yourself time down the end. And an analogy that I always have, because I love analogies, is someone once told me that property development is like walking along a corridor and shutting all the doors all the way to the end, and basically managing that process of closing all the doors, which is, bringing in a planning consultant, getting in an architect and running a project. But the way I see property development and property investment is you've got to shut the riskiest doors first. Otherwise, you get all the way down through the project, and then you can't shut the last door and complete the project. So, that's just to say, focus on central problems and share them, and give substance around why they're not potentially a problem in their eyes. Because if some things on the face of it can appear a problem, if you don't paint a picture, they might not be. So outline things from the outset, give them some literature around it and some context around it to try and prohibit these problems happening. And sometimes they do happen. And in my last slide, I talk about only worry about what you can't control. We've now got a situation where we've gone through legals, we've gone through valuation, and the lender is backpedaling. And now we're because what we got to lose, but also whose fault is that? And it might be the lenders, it might be the brokers, and that's what we're currently looking at navigating and bringing in again a second option as well from a refinancing process.
Nice, sound advice. Cool. So this week, a few of us from Aparo Social, which is our social housing portfolio. For those just tuning into this or haven't listened to some previous episodes, we've been building for the last 3.5 years a social housing portfolio down in South London, mainly Croydon, Lambeth, and Bromley. It's up to 120 plus beds at the moment. So it sort of started off as a bit of a side hustle, and it's grown into what is effectively a £20 million business, which has been a challenge to say the least. But we went up to Birmingham to meet our housing association face to face, and some of the things that I wanted to sort of shout about here really is that face to face interaction. I think we all now live in a world where it's Zoom call after Zoom call, and they are absolutely brilliant. And I genuinely love a Zoom call. I think you can get a lot done, but it doesn't necessarily build relationships. Shaking somebody's hand, having a general chit chat, seeing where they work, all those things help build relationships. And I really think that's what we managed to do on Wednesday. So yeah, I went up to Birmingham to meet with our housing association to discuss ironing out some creases, I guess would be the best way of describing it. We've gone through a bit of turmoil over the last I guess for a year, we've been sort of battling with what was our old housing association, who effectively was not operating how they should be operating. A lot of things going on in the back end. So we had to very aggressively kind of jump ship from them and bring in a new partner, which is the housing association that I went to meet this week. And it's been a difficult challenge trying to transition them into the portfolio that's been built. They don't have a London base until now. So they're sort of building a whole new business really in a different area, different geographic area. And that's the challenges that I have. And I went away from the meeting, and one of the final things I spoke about and talked about was, again, going back to that kind of holistic overview and thinking about it from a helicopter view. They're a small outfit in Birmingham, and with our London-based portfolio, they pretty much doubled in size almost overnight. And when I think about that in any business, it's massive. It's you need to be prepared for that. You need to resource up for that. You need to have capacity for that. You need to have mind space and headspace for it all. And I don't think either of us were prepared for that bigger jump and that bigger change. And we're only now 6 months down the line getting into flow of getting, operations in the place that they should be, and really kind of working and firing on all cylinders. So the advice, I guess, is to kind of when you're building business relationships and you're working with joint venture partners, to think about their situation as well as yours, and everything you can do to help grease the wheels with them and make sure that they're operationally successful will actually feed back to you as the business partner and help everything run a lot smoother. So hopefully going forward, we will be able to move forward a little bit more, less stressfully, I guess.
I just wanted to dive in and quickly say something on that front. With the interns, we did a talk on procurement, contractors, construction, and all of that sort of thing. And it was kind of a shock to the interns that we're not just always trying to get everything as cheap as possible. And I said I would much rather our projects be efficiently run, done quickly, and the contractor makes a good profit margin, and we make a good profit margin. And that's similar with obviously our relationship with our housing association. The best business relationship is where everyone is making good margin in their business because it's cohesive, it works. So having some sympathy and empathy on their position, and like Ben said, understanding it from their side, we said to our contractor a few times, like, you may not get this. And actually, which is relative for any business partnership or client-customer relationship, because it's got to be sustainable.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Cool. So Jack and Rob and myself are going to be out of action for most of Monday through to Wednesday next week. We're going to be going on to the Property Entrepreneur. Is it the Blueprint? What do they call it actually?
I don't know, some sort of cheat sheet, blueprint, model.
Yeah.
They all get a good name, don't they?
They do. And they're, Dan Hill is the owner of Property Entrepreneur. He's been running it for 10 years. This was kind of a shout out. I mean, we're looking forward to it. It's effectively a property and business masterclass exhibition, kind of chance to network with other business owners, property investors, property developers, a lot of structured learning. It's set at the Belfry Hotel and Golf Club in Birmingham. And it's a 3-day event, which we'll be finishing off with a round of golf at the Belfry, which is super exciting. But this was a bit of a shout out from my perspective to Dan Hill's Blueprint podcast. If it's, if you're listening to our podcast, thank you very much. I would implore you to add this Blueprint podcast to your list of favorites, because there's a lot of value, a lot of gold in there that I think you would benefit from if you're trying to build a property business. And also if you're trying to build any business, really, Dan Hill's done fantastically well for himself over the last couple of decades, building businesses, selling businesses, buying property, selling property, building this training program with the Property Entrepreneur, which seems to be, has gone from strength to strength. And it's world class, as you'll hear a lot of that word, building a world class team, building a world class business. And hopefully you can get a lot of value from the Blueprint podcast as well. anything you wanted to say?
No, nothing in particular. I think he's more business focused, more so than, I think if you're a through and through developer and you're going to learn development type skills, techniques, I think you'd probably get pretty bored. But from a business perspective, I think it's useful. So obviously Ben and I run service-based businesses and other types of businesses. That's definitely the property entrepreneur bag.
Yeah, I think like we've spoken about numerous times, I think early on in our sort of property business, we were very heavily focused on the deal, the deal, rather than the overarching business. And Dan and the blueprints that he does focus a lot on whether it's a property business or any business, structures and systems and processes and techniques that you can use to kind of improve those businesses. So yeah, do tune into that. But before you tune into that, tune into the Property XPerts Podcasts over on Spotify, Apple Podcasts. If you could leave us a review on Apple, that'd be great. And if you could rate us on Spotify, it would be much appreciated. We do want to keep spreading the good word. And we've had some amazing questions in that we're going to answer at the end of this. So stay tuned. Keep those flying in as well. And hopefully you're getting a lot of value from the conversations that we have every Friday at 5 p.m. Cool. Had some really interesting conversations this week with a company that we've spoken to numerous times on various projects called The Low Group. And it's something that I wasn't aware of until a couple of years ago. It's a company specializing in providing property guardians. So effectively what they are, let's say we buy a property, we know that it's unconditional and we have to go through a planning application that might take a year, 18 months. The idea is that you bring in the Low Group, they put property guardians in place. So they use the property during that planning permission process while it's vacant. They keep the building safe. It gives a great shelter for the houses that I've been into that operate this type of program. The tenants are often creatives. I've gone into these places where there's pictures up on the wall that they've painted or they've drawn, or sculptures that they've built, and seems to be a really good opportunity for that type of creative person. And you can get a lot cheaper rent from a tenant perspective, but from a Low Group business perspective and a property developer perspective, it keeps your property safe. You don't really pay anything for it. It can save you business rates. It's a really interesting business model that you absolutely should look at. If you've got an asset, it's going to be vacant for a number of months, and you want to make sure that the site is secure by having people there 24/7. It's great. If you want an introduction to the head of sales, which we've been in discussions with this week at the Low Group, then drop us a DM and we can make an introduction for you. The other thing that we discussed with them this week, which I didn't actually know they did until I rang, because we've got a very specific need in one of our properties where we have got what we like to call a rock star in the building, i.e. he is a druggie. We want him out of the property. He's causing lots of issues for other tenants and neighbours with antisocial behaviour. The police have been called 26 times and haven't done anything. So we're looking to now basically put in what's called a caretaker into the house to be there 24/7 to deter a lot of the antisocial behaviour that has been happening in that property. From a pricing perspective, you can get a caretaker on site for about £5,000 plus VAT a month. You can call them on and call them off as much as you want. So if you only need them there for 3 days, it's just prorated at that price. And I thought it was a very, very good way of solving antisocial behaviour in your properties, keeping the site secure, and relinquishing some of the vacant property costs like business rates and other things. Anything you wanted to add about that, Jack?
No, I just want to add that tenant is actually a dealer, not just a user.
Yeah.
So big problemo.
Yeah.
But I mean, not necessarily in particular. I mean, it's obviously quite, site security is obviously quite a serious thing, where it's very, very difficult for us because we've got obviously a private portfolio in Oxfordshire that we've been running and managing for for a very long time. We haven't ever had to take it this far, but this is now costing us money. Week in, week out, when there's we're not able to fill the rooms, we're not necessarily receiving the rents we should be, and it's all because of one problem tenant that's technically dealing drugs in the property. So we have to take vast action for the security of the tenants and also for the asset. And it's just a shame to have to step in, but these are the non social posts that you see from landlords, and we've been going through this for months, and it's not ideal. We actually had one of the interns ask, "What's the worst situation you've been in with regards to tenants?" And we said like 3 stories, and their jaws were on the table. But that is amongst 100 other good stories that we have had good tenants. But you have to deal with it. It's a percentage. If it's in like social housing in South London, it's obviously going to be heightened and a lot worse. But that's what you've got to deal with.
Yeah, I mean, every business will have bad clients. Fundamental is it's going to happen. So you just got to deal with it, just like this one. Cool. And on that note, when is enough? This was something you put in, so I'm intrigued.
Yeah, this is actually this week. We've obviously got the site, which has been a bit of a problem in planning, and we've kind of been taking it through a difficult planning process. So it was planning is one of those things that we normally have quite a few applications in, and sometimes you just don't get your way, and you're scratching your head why you didn't. And we still to this day think it's a result that we shouldn't have had, but we're still dealing with it. And it's sometimes ripping the Band-Aid off a bit faster can be helpful. And the other reason that I bring this up is we talked about it in the Ground Up podcast that we recorded yesterday morning, is there's actually a training business in our industry which has gone into liquidation. And my question I asked everyone on the Ground Up podcast was, and I'm asking it to Ben now, is we are entrepreneurs, solution providers, and there's always some form of solution or light at the end of the tunnel. But when is enough? And the conclusion that I got from the Ground Up boys was that there always is a solution, basically.
Yeah.
And it's something that you got to think to yourself. But from a business perspective, I think it's very healthy to have the mentality that there always is a solution. Otherwise, it gets very heavy and gets difficult. And if you're constantly in that you're out of control problem, you don't know where it's going, it's not healthy. But from a project perspective, sometimes enough is enough, and you need to cut ties and focus on other projects. Mm-hmm. So it's sort of a double-loaded question there, but just wanted to get your thoughts on it, and if you could share any advice for our listeners on, analysing when it's time to move on from a project and let it be part of the past, or keep fighting it and threaten everything else.
I think there's kind of various ways I could answer that. I think there's first way being, there's financial and then there's emotional. Financially, can you stick it out? Is it profitable to do so, or are you losing money in it? And that's one way of addressing things. But also, are you so emotionally drained from it that it's just having another impact on your life that way? And I think only you can really answer that. But yeah, I've been in situations before where I just can't deal with so much going on, for this being one additional worry that I have to consider. I'd rather just cut ties and move on and chalk it up as a loss. And that's difficult as an entrepreneur. Like you say, you always want, and problem solver, because that's fundamentally who I am and who you are in terms of approaching things. I don't think I can answer kind of when is enough. It's always going to be specific to that particular situation and project and issue. But I think you kind of know emotionally when you're so drained and so invested in something that it's the right time to kind of give it up and move on. But from a financial perspective, there's lots of, my logical brain would say, how does it look financially? When can we get out of this hole? And I'll try and stick it out until that that point comes. But I don't know. It's a difficult kind of thing to talk about without having a specific case to talk about.
Yeah, I would just say share and get an opinion from someone else. That's a good place to start. Someone that can understand the situation, can understand the repercussions, and can understand what is required to potentially move on from that project or keep doing that project. And I think that's a really, really good place to start. But it is difficult because you sometimes hang on for a project just out of ego. Sometimes just like, I'm not going to let this project beat me. I'm like a dog with a bone with this. I'm going to keep it going. And that's the optimist mentality is what gets you into those positions and gets you out of those positions, but it also gets you into those positions. So it's kind of catch-22.
That's the entrepreneurial thing right there, isn't it? It's not wanting to give up and wanting to persist and be successful. I find actually people either not in your space or somebody like a business coach or a non-exec that has, doesn't understand the day-to-day, they will often ask the most prudent questions where, it's there's no bullshit. It's just cutthroat. Like, well, why are you doing it that way? Or why are you bothering doing this? And you're so caught up generally in the day-to-day and your feet running around like, mad. And you sometimes forget to just step back and be like, is it worth it? Is it worth it? And only you can really answer that. Yeah, interesting question. I'm going to throw something up on the screen, which is from Jordan again. Thanks, Jordan. Thank you. Really enjoyable episode. I've actually stayed in a property guardianship before, some better than others. Could you set up your own company like this and offer as a service? I mean, you could. Are we going to? Absolutely not. We've been banned for starting new companies. We've got enough on our plate. But it's the service that I've had before from the Low Group and the way they operate and the feedback I get is great. And yeah, I think they're onto a really good business model. Oh, something's gone off. Yeah, you could set up your own company, Jordan. Yeah, but we won't be anytime soon. Cool.
The last one is actually kind of leading on from the previous point.
Yeah.
Which is always don't worry about what you can't control. You have things goes wrong, things that go right, and you need to keep reminding yourself of them and keep plowing forward. And I think that will help also the mindset of when to call it a day or not.
The quote,
a bit doom and gloom because we haven't had anything serious happen to us, but it was just topical.
Yeah. The quote in front is, worry only about that which you can control, learn how to adapt to everything else. I think as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, like we've said, that generally is the superpower of an entrepreneur. It's the ability to be flexible and adapt and grow. And I think that's how generally we're wired. Cool. So we said we'd answer quite a few questions this week because we've had a number of them come in. So this is the first one: deal sourcing process / strategy. I mean, Jack, you could do a whole probably 4-hour
3 weeks
seminar on this type of stuff. But yeah, let's go like top 3 tips for deal sourcing.
Cool. So on-market deals do work. So don't be afraid to look at on-market deals. In line with that, you need to build your own process and activity. If you don't have your own process and activity, what does that look like? I know that I've kind of said you need your own process, and the question is, what is the process and the strategy? Work out what your 5 to 10 year goals are. Work back from that and what type of deals would facilitate those goals, and hit those ones hard and have a process. So that's where you find them, how many you're viewing, how many offers you're getting out, what you're following up on, and so to speak. So that is on market do work, process and strategy is kind of all wrapped up in that second point. And then the third one is create the deal. No deal arrives on your desk with a red ribbon around it and a label saying deal. It's your job to create it. I often see people that have missed out on deals that we've bought and they don't understand how we've got it for less than what they were willing to pay for it. Is because the creation is there of that deal. It's the energy to keep in contact with the agent. It's the right timing because we kept tabs on it. It's the understanding what the vendor actually wants, understanding what the agent wants. The agent might want the resales once you bought the site. So it's all about creation of the deal. So on-market deals do work. Have a process and strategy that suits your goals. And then last but not least, create. You will never find a deal that's already created for you. That's your job.
Nice. Very good. Second question. How would you go about valuing a site with 4 Army cadet buildings on it, unsure of the use class? So I did a bit of research before coming onto this, just figure out what I think the use class is, and I'm happy to be told that I'm wrong, but I'm using Planning Geek like most people do. I think it's use class F2, sort of local community use. There's a few examples of what that might be, you know, things like scout huts, outdoor sport, petting farms, skating rinks, sports arenas, swimming pools, tennis courts, local halls, a hall or meeting place for local use. So I think it probably is F2. Unfortunately, there's no permitted development rights for that. So you're looking at going down the full planning route for that. And then in terms of how you would value it, it depends what you're going to get on it, right? In terms of like residual land value, if you've got an idea of what's possible, if you're purely looking to try to figure out what the existing value is on it, it's a difficult one, I guess, because the Army cadets probably aren't paying a rent, are they? So you've got no financial, like normally you would say, oh, it's a property, the income is 60 grand a year in this area. You might value that up on a 10% yield, so it's worth 600 grand. But with this, if there's no income to go off, you know, I would say that you'd almost have to look at a residual land value for the potential of the site to figure out what you might want to pay for it. How would you go about it, Jack?
Yeah, I mean, this is screaming to me subject to planning or conditional purchase, because exactly as Ben said, we bought a police station off the Thames Valley Police. You are not going to kick them out and rent it out to any other police force, because there isn't any other police force other than the Thames Valley Police. So it's really difficult to put a value on that. We coincidentally could buy ours unconditionally because it had a residential house on site, so that we knew that residential property, even though it wasn't used by Constable Jeffrey something Trunchbull, whatever you want to call him, it could have been used as a residential house. We then were taking planning risk on the commercial aspect of the actual station, which, you know, wasn't necessarily like a lockup station, but station. But anyway, so the principle is I would be going in conditional or subject to planning. You kind of need some de-risk of change of use or what you can use it as before you even buy the site, because it's very, very difficult to put a value on it. But I mean, don't discount it. There's no reason that you might be able to get planning to repurpose it for the exact reasons it's not in demand in its existing use, which is normally a good indication that you can get something else there.
Nice. Good. So now we've got a couple of questions from Jordan, which we thank you very much for. Do you have a target for how much development stock you want to retain and rent out each year? I'll start by giving a bit of background history. I think historically, we've pretty much done a 50-50 split, haven't we? It's sort of when you look back and work out what we've retained and what we've sold, it's been 50-50. Not really by any magical strategy or thought process. It just happened to have been, these are the projects we felt were right for selling. These are the projects we thought are right for renting and keeping in our portfolio. And that's been on investor input, where our business is at the time, what the market's doing, and various other things. So it's difficult to say. We've got 65 plus units being delivered over the next year. And I looked the other day, and I think we're probably going to be holding about 25 of those, maybe 20 of them. So let's say somewhere between like 30 and 50% again, we're going to be holding into our rental portfolio. You got to look at what's right for you, really. I think we've said, haven't we, Jack, that maybe we've kept hold of too many in the growth of the business, because we've not had that cash being kicked back into the business to help grease the wheels of an early property development business. What are your thoughts?
I really struggle to see how some people don't want to hold on to stuff. I feel that we're in an industry where capital appreciation works in the background while you build the cash flow. And I'm a massive believer that that's one of the huge benefits of property. But I completely understand that, and in my opinion, we probably held too much to start with. I think that any growing, new, young, unbacked, and what I mean is, you know, it's not a spin-off from another development business. We know a development company where the owner sold out his previous development company for 400 million, and he was starting again. He could probably hold as much or sell as much as he wants. But for a growing, new, fresh, sort of new money business, I would highly recommend selling more in the first 5 years and then being in a better position that you've built an infrastructure and a foundation to hold more stock later on, and don't get too obsessed with holding from day one, because it ties up more capital, and you can't pay project managers or staff with rent roll for a project that's going to be finished in 4 years' time, but you're more likely to be able to pay them from sales for a project that's finished in 2 years' time. So in the first 5 years, I think it is a logical step to sell more than hold. After that point, it's kind of up to you, whatever you want to do. My personal opinion is I'd rather hold more than I sell, but that is my opinion. And opinions are a little bit like arseholes. Everyone's got one.
Nice. Good. Second question from Jordan. What is your 5 and 10 year plan for XP Properties, and how does this run in tangent to your other businesses? Yeah, good question. I think from my perspective, I've always seen the development side of things being the thing that probably lasts the longest out of the businesses that I start or do something with. Mainly because I think it'll always be a passion. It's something that I think you can kind of scale up or scale down quite quickly. I.e., if you don't want to do projects, you just want to do one project a year, and it's more of a lifestyle thing, and you're just doing it with some family cash and just turning a few things over. You can. Whereas other businesses, you don't really build and scale an architectural practice to then suddenly one day be like, oh, I want to scale this back down again now because there's too many moving parts, and it's a business. So yeah, I think we had big ambitions and did a 10-year plan when we first set out on XP Property 6 years ago. Actually, we should go back and review those, Jack, to see sort of where we wanted to be versus where we are now. And I remember thinking the actual figures on there were ludicrous, really. But we've done a pretty good job either way.
Yeah, I mean, for me, we've been running for 6 years now, and actually several months before then in sort of pre-business opening. So you could almost say 7 years. This has been a thing that we've been growing and working on. And even before that, obviously you build skill and knowledge and experience before we set up the businesses to grow it. So we're already sort of 6 to 7 years old. The next sort of 5 to 10 years, I feel that we're a development company is much more like a steam train than an electric train. It takes a little bit of a time to get it going. And we're excited to enjoy a bit more of the ride now. We've been filling the steam engine with coal, and to look at some lovely scenery and fill that furnace less frequently. But I feel like we're finally at critical mass, which if you're in a steam train is like the speed you need to be running at. And I think we're, incrementally maybe get a little bit bigger, but we feel that we've got a good team to support that. And it's been difficult. A friend of ours said, you only start making profits when you stop growing. And all of our businesses have been growing significantly over the last sort of 7 years. I wouldn't say that XP Property is actually relative or relevant for any of the other businesses around them. I think all of the other businesses would foster a healthy growth or even stability without XP Property. It just really helps that we're all under one roof, and all the businesses' revenues spin off into each other's businesses. But I don't think that we've actually got. There's a metric that you should never have. Not one of your clients should be over something like 30 or 40% of your revenue. I don't think any of our businesses feed XP as if it is that. They're all of our businesses, which is often misconceived, are actually proper businesses that run by themselves. XP Surveys probably does 4 surveys a year for XP Property, and we're doing something along the lines of 180 surveys a year. So it's not a big revenue count for us. Obviously, as they grow, all of them grow, which is the nature of what we enjoy, building an ecosystem. But I don't think there's too much more that's completely drastic. We might be bringing out some other forms of strategies that we're going to be working on. Aaron and I have been working much more on land and planning to take stuff through the planning permission process, because with finance costs and bill costs going where they're going, there's much more margin in. There's always been more margin in planning plays, but it's even more exaggerated. But nothing too huge change. Maybe we'll do a review like Ben said, but I hope that answers it, Jordan.
Yeah, I was going to say season 1, episode 49 was our 2023 special. And that was all about the learnings of 2023 and goals for 2024. And I think we did touch on some longer term goals in that session as well. So yeah, it was streamed 7 months ago, last episode of last year. So episode 49, season 1, go ahead over and check that out if you haven't yet. Cool. Final question from Jordan, but thanks very much for all of these questions. They're really useful. Can you share your thoughts on commercial to residential cluster flats as a strategy for a greenish developer stuck in a bit of analysis paralysis as to what to pursue in terms of project profile? I guess it comes back to you're clearly in a place where you're wondering how much you should sell, how much you should sort of rent, and what that balance might be. And obviously, cluster flats are always a great thing to do for hold, because you are likely to get higher yield, higher rental income by operating in that manner. You've got everything in one place. So again, that kind of critical mass or value in scale. You've got that when you've got a larger building that's split into smaller flats, just like St Helens Mill, which was our award-winning development of 2022. 14 flats in one place. We've got management is easier. Everything is easier than having different flats scattered around all over the place. For a greenish developer, you say here, maybe commercial to residential, depends on the size of it, might not actually be the best way forward for you. It might actually be, a single buy to let as your first option, maybe a small refurbishment is your second bite of the cherry, and then you move on to something slightly bigger with extensions, and I don't know, it might be a bit of a step up to then throw in sort of a larger commercial to residential scheme as a newish developer. You might need to cut your teeth on something smaller first. What are your thoughts, Jack?
Yeah, I mean, just on the strategy of cluster flats, for anyone listening out there, cluster flats is when you basically build a cluster of HMOs out of flats. I think it's a really, really good strategy, because you get so much economies of scale with development that you don't get with a HMO. The great thing about a HMO is once you do it, you do the work once, and it keeps generating rent roll. But the upside of cluster flats is you're improving a really strong cash flow business model from one particular project. So I think they work really, really well, especially with projects where you have to knock down a building, build a new one, and you can't make the deal stack. That's typically when they work well, which is what we're doing at Long Hamborough for our scheme there. I also have a view that I don't believe that doing 1 or 2 HMOs is really worth it. You kind of got to go for it and bring the management in-house. Otherwise, you're just paying a lettings agent 15% of your gross revenue for the sake of potentially bringing in the same rent as a single let. So that 5% in gross rent difference and bringing the bills in-house might not actually make sense. So you're just becoming a busy fool for the sake of no reason. So HMO portfolios, I think you should target over 40 to 50 beds to make it worthwhile at doing. And then sort of capabilities, you be the judge of that. I think that if you're comfortable doing a block of 5 flats and you're comfortable independently delivering a HMO, go for it. The biggest change and challenge that you're going to have is making sure the planning is okay. Once that part's done, it's essentially the same as a conversion of flats, but just with loads of en-suites and bathrooms and fire compliance. But it's essentially the same type of project. So I wouldn't get too hung up on the complexities around that. I would say your best friend's going to be a broker to make sure that the finance at the tail end is okay. Because obviously when you're dealing with planning, cluster flats, HMOs, it's a very unique type of product. So make sure that your lending is de-risked as best you can. But I would personally say go for it. I think it's a great strategy. It combines value add and cash flow. And so in some cases can be, our Long Hamborough scheme is an absolute monster of a cash cow. The asset is going to be worth £1.1 million. And our award-winning block of 14 flats, which are all single let, which is worth £3.5 million, makes less net income than our £1.1 million asset of cluster flats. So the cash flow is unheard of. And that's the beauty of HMOs, and that's the beauty of economies of scale, doing it all in one development. So, John, you know where we are if we can help. If you want a second opinion, your analysis paralysis needs a second opinion, let us know.
Nice, good. I was just putting this on the screen. So let people know that we will be doing another site tour later this year. So if you want to come around and see some of our sites, we went around 3 sites back in April, about 35 developers. coming around to site with us. This was actually one we did late December last year, which we haven't got an updated video for April's one. I should probably get that loaded up. But yeah, if you want to join our next site tour, get in touch. Drop a comment in the video below, and we'll get Christina to send you details to sign up for that. We'd love to see you there. And if you've got nothing else to talk about, Jack, we've just hit the 1 hour mark. We'll say goodbye and have a good weekend. See ya.